Hallo, is falsje goed gemichen, Gaelic first. Hello, and welcome to Perth Highland Games. So, the ancient history of the Highland Games is a matter of some discussion, but I don't think it's beyond imagination when we think of other sort of tribal cultures across the world coming together on annual bases around, things like the summer and winter solstices, and as agriculture became a thing, we would come together for events around about harvest time. When we get groups of people coming together to celebrate, feast, drink, there'd be dancing, there'd be singing. Storytelling would be quite important to people at those times. And when you get any sort of group of people together, there's always going to be some level of competitive bent. Who can pick up the heaviest thing? Who can carry the heavy thing? Who can throw the heaviest thing the furthest of the highest? And these things naturally sort of develop over time until when we sort of local, the Greeks developing into the Olympic Games, and we've got our Highland Games. As the clan system developed in Scotland, families coming together, the heads of families or clan chiefs would be looking for their own personal retinue, so they'd be looking for the best bards to entertain guests, dancers and such like. The athletics element comes into it as well when we're looking at things like bodyguards, so the strongest men, the best fighters would get those jobs. But also in terms of communication, if we need to communicate with somebody in the next glen, quickest way to do that is to send somebody up and over the hill. So you can see that in some games who even in the modern era still have the hill running events. It would be almost a sort of direct line back to that sort of time. Next up, what we're going to go through is some of the sights, sounds and events you might expect to see at Perth Highland Games. First up, let's hear from a local man who's done a lot to reinvigorate the traditional sporting event and social event of stone lifting.
Hi, my name's Charlie, and I'm the creator of the Ardblair Stones. When I was a very small boy, I used to work at the Highland Games. When I say work, I used to run and do the scores between the heavy events and the press. And it was sort of taking part in that and being involved in the games in that capacity that I sort of noticed that everybody seems so far away from the caber and the hammer, obviously with good reason, because of I suppose they're quite dangerous implements, but they're far away. It just seemed to me that they needed something they could get involved with. They didn't need to feel awkward or self-conscious about crossing a barrier or getting involved in something, whether it was a dress code or lack of skill or ability or how they were going to be received. And the Ardblair Stones was quite born out of that as a sort of desire to make events more approachable so that people wouldn't be self-conscious, and they realised it was for anybody and everybody, and if people wanted advice or suggestions, then they could be given it at the time. I think it's a great thing, and I suspect it's probably how the origins of the Highland Games, everybody got involved, very much a community thing, and it wasn't just necessarily a spectators thing. The Ardblair Stones made their debut at the Blairgowrie Rattray Highland Games in September of 2013. The Ardblair Stones consists of 9 stones which are lifted onto whiskey butts, and whiskey butts are approximately 52 inches in height, so they're a fair old height, they're about up to my chest here, and you lift the stones, which are spherical, they're very smooth, and they range from 18 kilograms all the way up to 152 kilograms, and as the stones get larger, obviously the diameters get wider, and they become increasingly more difficult to lift. I say to people when they're lifting these stones to try and concentrate really on lifting the next stone rather than rushing it or worrying too much about the time, because I set the stones up as more of a personal thing. I really sort of as a personal challenge rather than people sort of competing with each other at an event. It's more of a personal thing, I think. But then some people treat it differently. They're into the competitive element of it, which is absolutely fine. And some people, I suppose, it's more of a holistic thing. And we do get people of all shapes and sizes and ages taking part in the stones, which is a wonderful thing to see. You may have seen on the TV in World's Strongest Man or various strongman competitions that they do have an event called the Atlas Stones. And the Atlas Stones tend to be the final event in a World's Strongest Man competition, the biggest sort of raw test of strength. I mean, it involves every single muscle group, and they're a challenging thing to lift because of how smooth they are. And the Ardblair Stones are essentially the same as Atlas Stones, and I called them Ardblair Stones to make them identifiable so that people would recognise them as a set. One of the differences with the Ardblair Stones above strongman competitions is that there's a ban on tacky, which is a substance which strongmen use on their arms. It's like a sort of almost like a glue. It's like a resin, and it goes all up the forearms. And I wanted to keep the Ardblair Stones all inclusive so that it's accessible to, as I say, all ages and people and general public. And a lot of these people aren't necessarily seasoned stone lifters or strongmen. So if you're up for the challenge and you'd like to come and tackle the Ardblair Stones, follow us on social media. We travel all around the country. The event's free, and we'll look forward to seeing you.
Among all the other sights and sounds you can expect to see at Highland Games, one of the first things that probably springs to people's mind is the sight of attractive, strong men throwing heavy implements around the field. Introducing our heavyweights. John Neal from Perth. Willie Faulkner from Glasgow. John Shanks, Kirramure. Craig Winslow, Dumbarton. And Paul Deary from Carluke. One of the more unusual events at the Highland Games is the Scots Hammer, different to the Olympic hammer in terms of implements and techniques. Obviously the Olympic hammer's a wire hammer, ball on a single handle, whereas we're throwing what would be, you could almost sort of see a correlation between the Scots hammer and old-fashioned farming sledgehammers, which is presumably where the technique came from. So we have a 4-foot rattan handle, which is quite flexible. And again, with sort of similar weights to the shot, but with a 16-pound hammer and 22-pound hammer. The main difference in the technique, as you can see, is the rather interesting footwear that we have, which kind of holds us in place. And there's a range of different styles, but essentially what we're looking at is something with a little bit of support for the ankle, but long sort of flat blades which we sort of dig into the ground with, and that just sort of helps us maintain our support. What we're not doing is rotating with the hammer, we are turning the hammer around us, so we need that sort of grip to kind of stay stationary. So again, throwing from behind the trig this time, there's no regulation on sort of distance, but obviously you need to be close enough to the trig so you're not short-changing your throw, but you need enough space so that at the point of release when you step out, you're not going to step onto or over the trig. So again, these things you just sort of work out yourself in training. Technique essentially is you cast out the hammer to whichever your throwing side is. Again, I'm a right-handed thrower, so I would cast the hammer out to my right-hand side, and I would lean over to that. We use a substance on our hand called tacky resin, it's pine tar resin. You may well have seen this if you watch any strongman events, World's Strongest Man. When it comes to the Atlas Stones, you'll see the guys, they're covered in the stuff on their forearms. So we just use a little bit of similar sort of substance just on the hand, just helps us grip the hammer handle. What we don't want to be doing is gripping on. Well, that shortens all your muscles, shortens your orbit of the way. What we want to do is almost sort of squeeze onto the hand, let our tacky set into the handle, and then just relax. So it's really your tacky's doing quite a lot of the work for you, and it just allows you to stay sort of longer and smoother as you rotate around. So from there, you're pulling the hammer across yourself, swinging it up above your head, and you want your high point to be kind of behind you somewhere. And as you're swinging it down, the hammer's less of a pulling event and more of a pushing event. which seems quite unusual when you watch the guys doing it. What we're looking to do is get the hammer up above our head to a certain point where we can then think about smashing it down, almost like you're chopping wood. So as we pull it back down towards the low point, and then the momentum carries it back up. And what we're looking to do is turn our body and shoulder around it so we can get ourselves back into this kind of position again to apply the pressure. And this is where you're applying the speed and the pressure to it. So your low point at the front, high point at the back, we do this 2 or 3 times, and then once we've got enough speed going into it, you're leaning back into it to counter the weight of the hammer, and then you're just pulling it up and letting it go high at the top there, and then obviously your high point's sort of behind you. The first evidence of games being recorded in Perth City was in October of 1826, and the games were held sporadically throughout the 19th century. But it wasn't until 1925, when the games were held at Muirton Park, then home of St Johnstone FC, that they were sort of held a bit more regularly. With longer breaks for the war years and a lack of sort of regular committee to commit to holding the games on a regular basis, Perth Games weren't really established properly until 1977, with a committee being formed committed to keeping the games in the city on an annual basis. The committee achieved charitable status in 1997, which allows us to draw upon financial support to help the games continue going forward. On top of our normal programme of Highland Games events, Perth hosts 3 national championships, pipe band and drum major events. Family entertainment is also available, with a wide range of events going on outside of the events arena. We also host a variety of trade stands and refreshment vendors. So the shot put will be an event most of you will be familiar with. It's quite famous through the Olympic Games. We are dealing with 2 different weights, 16-pound shot and the 22-pound shot predominantly. Cast iron balls, thrown in one hand, left or right, depending on the thrower. Because we're thrown on grass as opposed to concrete that you would see at Olympic Games, the conditions can be quite changeable. So a lot of throwers would prefer the sort of glide or even the half sort of rotation, what's called sort of South African. As a few throwers will do the full rotation, but I say your margin for error just goes up given the conditions. So yeah, pressing into the neck, keeping your elbow high. So shot in one hand, pressed up against the neck. You're moving from the back of the thrown area to the front, 7'6", and when you get to the toe board, you're landing in what we would refer to as the power position. So your hips quite open, just so your feet slightly offset. Obviously the pressure's coming off whatever hand you're throwing it with, would be your throwing leg. So I'm a right-handed thrower, so my right leg would be throwing it. As soon as I land in position, leg bent, you're looking to push up, and everything comes from the leg. Everybody thinks, you're throwing it, and it's a big arm movement. It's not really, you got to think where your biggest muscles in your leg, so that's what's getting the momentum of the ball going. So triple extension, ankle, knee, hip, turning through the abdomen, all the big muscles there, and then you're finishing off with the relatively sort of small muscles in the arm, and a wee final flick with the hand to project it out. So whether you're using the rotation or the glide, the power position here is as you're looking to sort of close off your left hand side, what we call blocking. There's a throwing cue we refer to as punch a giant and elbow the dwarf. As we come up and round and swing our hand around, you're looking for your non-throwing arm to draw back quickly, elbow the dwarf, and you're punching the giant as you're throwing the shot put up and out. So the weight over the bar, it's another chance for us to have a look at the 56-pound weight. This time we're throwing it up instead of out, and over a bar. Again, 56 pounds comes from the sort of farming history, and you can almost kind of imagine farm hands on a break, doing that boys will be boys bit of how high can I throw this? And it's just one of these things that's sort of worked its way into Highland Games, given the links with sort of agriculture. So what we're looking at here is, again, single-handed, picking the weight up from between the legs just to set balance, and you'll see swing out. Some people swing it forward and out to the side, swing it back to the front and in. Some people think that puts them a bit off of balance, but it's just a couple of casts out just to sort of get your balance, get into a rhythm of it, swinging in between the legs. So what we're looking for here is, after you've sort of set your balance, swinging the weight out as it drops back down between the legs, what we're looking for is it will reach a high point behind you. So it's swung between the legs, it will reach a high point behind you. And again, you're almost looking for that fraction of a moment where the weight almost goes weightless, right at the top of the swing, just before it starts coming down. So again, what you're not wanting to do, again, 56 pounds, it's reasonable weight. We don't want to be muscling that about. What you're looking for is to use gravity. So as you feel the weightlessness of the weight in your hand, you're dropping your hips again, dropping down, allowing that to accelerate the weight as it comes down in between your feet. And almost as if you're lifting a sort of barbell, you're looking for the weight to get sort of in between the balls of your feet, because that's the best place for you to apply pressure to. It's where you would jump from, it's where you would lift a big heavy weight from, it's where you would clean a barbell from. Once the weight reaches that height, then you're accelerating it through the hips again, triple extension, ankle, knee, hip, throwing everything up, and you're just pulling the weight up in front of yourself and casting it straight up and in the air. Looks a lot more dangerous than it actually is. Your arc, you're not wanting the arc of the weight to be too wide, because obviously that's just a waste of energy. You're looking for it to, as efficiently as possible, go up and back down in as narrow a space as possible while clearing the bar. So if you're too far forward or too far back, you're going to knock the bar off. So again, another implement where there's sort of local variations to it. You'll see in a lot of American games, you'll see a metal pole suspended from the supports at the side. If the weight hits the bar will just swing, and in some games you will find that as the weight comes down and hits the bar, it will still go over and be counted as a throw. In a lot of games in Scotland, you won't kind of get that with this sort of small wooden pegs that you can see here. If the weight comes down on it, it's going to break and it's a no throw. So yeah, again, just another one of these sort of wee interesting variations from one games to the next. Officially recorded element of this would be in the middle of the century. Malcolm Canmore, son of Duncan, of Macbeth fame, once he had dealt with Macbeth and became King of Scotland, he called together the clan chiefs. So essentially he could pick the best of the best. He took the best of their guys for the royal court, and we have our sort of first royal ascent of Highland Games activities. So again, the best fighters, the best runners for messages. This would have continued relatively unchanged, but with sort of obvious local variations throughout the years, which are still reflected in some of the modern games. There are some sort of small twists and turns in terms of equipment and events that happen. Up until the mid-18th century, with active prescription, after the Jacobite uprisings, London wanted to gain control over the Highlands, so the active prescription effectively banned the wearing of tartan and the playing of bagpipes themselves, which were regarded as a weapon of war, and the carrying of sort of personal weapons. Clan chiefs were no longer allowed to keep personal retinues. The active prescription was in place for 40 years, so we've got a generation there almost of sort of lost athletic and musical talent.
Hi, my name is Alistair Duthie. I'm the pipe major of the Perth District Pipe Band. Perth District Pipe Band was formed in 1893 by some former members of the 4th Volunteer Battalion of the Black Watch. So it's been around for 128 years. It's very much part of the community, and we have members in the band of all ages. In the past number of years, we've performed at the Norrimilla night lights, the Christmas lights switch on, the Scottish Tractor and Agricultural Association show, Perth Agricultural Show, played for the Queen, Prince William. So we play at loads of varied events. Perth District Pipe Band has played for a number of years at Perth Highland Games. Now, to get ready for a Highland Games is not just a 5-minute organisation. We practice twice a week, and we also teach learners as well, so that you make sure that your band is going to continue on and not sort of fall by the wayside through lack of members. And it also helps to continue on the tradition of Highland bagpipes and pipe band drumming as well. The first thing you have to do with the band is tune them up, and that generally takes around about half an hour to 45 minutes before you're due to compete. By the time you warm the instrument up and get everything working at its optimum level. And then you just hope that things don't run slightly behind so that you go past that optimum point before you're actually on the park and in the competing circle. Once you get to the start line, the word of command is given for the band to march forward and into a circle. This starts with 3 pace rolls from the drummers and an introductory E from the pipers. You then play, it might be a march just being real, it could be a medley selection, or it might just be marches. And this depends on the different grades that the bands will be competing in. In the competition circle, the judges are looking for a number of specific things. The first thing is that everyone is working as a unit, whether it be marching or playing. They're also looking for a steadiness of sound so that you haven't got instruments going flat or sharp because people are blowing badly, and that all the instruments are in tune. That's all the drums. The bass and tenor drums are tuned, and they should technically be tuned to the bass drone of the pipes as to what pitch that's tuned at. So that creates an overall sound which, accompanied by the drones from the pipes, should then be lifted and carried outside of the circle. That's what the judges are effectively looking for.
So now having a look at the weight for distance. Weight for distance is a one-handed throwing event, kind of similar movement to the discus you may well have seen in the Olympics. This time we've got slightly more space to work with behind the trig. It's a larger weight, so we're throwing the light weight would be 28 pounds and the heavy weight would be 56 pounds. These would just be based off a sort of traditional farming weights that you would have found. Also 56 pounds a half a hundredweight. So you know what farmers would have used to sort of measure corn and various things for selling. So you can see setting up at the back of the trig. Take a minute to settle yourself, and then we start swinging the weight out. So swing it a couple of times left to right again. Some of this is personal preference. Some people use one swing, some people use a couple. It's just to really sort of set your weight. You're looking for your weight to be through your hips. Sort of counterbalance the weight that's in your hand. 28 pounds when it's moving at speed's quite a significant weight. So once it's what we call cast out to the side, you let the weight drop behind you. And once it's sort of reached the peak of its upswing, it almost kind of goes weightless. And you're kind of waiting for that moment there to then start turning around towards the front of the trig. What you're looking for is a dip of the hips. We don't really want to be pulling the weight too much, because again, when you can imagine getting up to the sort of 56 pound weight, you don't really want to be muscling that round. You're kind of using gravity to sort of pull that round for you. So a drop of the hips starts accelerating the weight through, and again, as we're turning around, the first turn, what you're looking for is to get your feet in the ground before the weight comes too far forward. Again, thinking about that separation of the shoulders and hips, you're wanting the weight behind you, so that as you turn into your second turn, you're using your body weight to pull that weight along with you. So by the time you land at the trig, in your power position, pulling off your right foot, you're wanting the weight quite far behind you, so you've got a big long pull to release it up and high. So you can see the orbit of the weight when it's at the back, away from the throwing area. It should be quite low to the ground. You know, the orbit's kind of sort of low at the back and kind of high at the front. And again, personal preference. Some guys you'll see throwing, this is it's quite obvious. It's really low at the back and really high at the front. Other throwers you'll see it's maybe a bit more flat. Again, this is just a personal preference. Perth Highland Games have been lucky enough to pair up with Scone Palace, who have been gracious enough to host the games on Palace grounds. let's find out a little bit more about the gardens, buildings and history of this crowning place of Scottish kings.
Hi there, William Stormont at Scone Palace here to announce the launch of our new membership scheme, Friends of Scone. This gives you 12-month rolling access to the gardens, our beautiful gardens here at Scone, and also a lot of discounted offers in our shop, in our cafe, to our luxury accommodation, and special membership activities like being able to access tickets early ahead of our key events throughout the year. So it's a really great package, and we really hope that our loyal season ticket holders and new people locally take up the offer to be a friend of Scone as we grow into the future in what's going to be a couple of big years for us. So we hope to welcome you all here and on board as we grow in this journey.
As balletic and endearing as some of the Highland Games heavy events may be, for those of you who prefer something a little more graceful, let's have a look at the Highland dancers.
Hi, I'm Yvonne and I teach Highland dancing at Inspire Studios in Perth. Highland dancing is for all ages and all skill set, whether it's girls or boys, if they want to compete or just dance to have fun and also to go to shows and demonstrations. It's there for all. If you want to compete at Highland dancing, it does take a lot of time and a lot of dedication. My dancers will practice with me 3 hours a week. However, they will also practice at home, and then when they go to competition level, they would be they'd have 2 to 3 years of dancing under their belt so they could compete competently. So when the dancers are competing, the judges are looking for neat and accurate footwork. They're also looking for the knees to be turned out. They're also looking for elevation, which is jumping. They're also looking for your backs to be straight, and they're looking for arm positions, and they're also looking for your head position. Bearing in mind, they've got to do all of this in time to the music. So the first dance you'll see is called Paddy Baz. And as you'll see from the dancers, Paddy Ba is to be danced as a 2-beat. So that means the pupils have to get their feet over at the same time to the music, and they have to then beat the back foot. That's one of the beginner dances that they would learn when they come to my class. And then from there, we progress on to the Paddy Baz and high cuts. Again, you'll see the dancers displaying the 2-beat movement, but then we now introduce the high cuts, which they have to beat at the back of their legs, preferably a 2-beat once they become more advanced, and their knees will be turned out at a 45-degree angle. Now you'll see the Highland Fling, and this is a very traditional dance, and actually going back in time, Highland dancing was actually danced by male dancers, and it was to show strength and stamina before going to war or for going into battle. As you will see, first of all, the very important bow, which for the same as Paddy Baz, and Paddy Baz high cuts, it is a 6-count bow. Once that bow has taken place, we go into the first step, and again it's all about your foot movement, your knee movement, your back and your head positions and your arms. We then go on to the second step. There's lots of different steps in the Highland Fling. The children are learning toes and heels just now, and you'll see when they're doing toe and heel, they will try to keep their knees out to that desired angle as much as they can. We then progress on to the third step, which is shake and rock. So the children have to demonstrate a good shake movement, followed by a good rocking movement, still trying to keep the knees out as far they can as possible, which is very difficult on this step. We then finish, because the Highland, they're doing the 4 steps, but you can do 6 steps Highland Fling. The kids have showed you a 4-step. They will now finish off with the end step, and they are performed it with 1 turn, but they can be performed with 2 turns. And you'll also notice my dancers turn with their hands up, as opposed to their arm down, and that's just to a little bit more difficulty coming into the dance. So again, the sword dance is absolutely, it's a battle dance, as they would say, and you'll see it's very intricate. The children have to make sure, or the pupils, they have to make sure that they don't kick those swords. If they kick those swords, if they're at a competition, they will not get a place. They're out. That's the only dance you're allowed to glance at the floor. You're not allowed to put your head down, but you're absolutely allowed to glance. And you'll see when they do the first step, they dance around the swords, doing the paddy ba and high cut movement. When they go into the sword, this is where it becomes very intricate, because they have got their feet positioned, but they have to watch, still jumping, but they have to make sure they don't touch those swords at all times, which is especially difficult when you go to the hilts of those swords. Then you'll hear the clap, which goes into the quick step. Now, therefore, there's a lot of movement going on at a far faster speed, while they're still having to watch those swords at all times. And then they finish off with a back step going into a bow. The last dance performed by the girls is the Chantreuse. This dance is a very difficult dance because, as you'll probably notice on the other dances, the fling and the sword dance, everything's contained in one area. The Chantreuse, there is lots of movement, and the children have to make sure they use the whole floor when they're dancing, but they must get back to the same place they started from. We then progress on to the second step. Again, it's another travelling step where the children have to make sure they get a good shake and they get a good step to the side. Then after that, we then progress on to a stationary step, the hop brush beat beat step. The judges will be looking for on this step, they're looking for close and neat footwork at all times. You will then hear the children clap because that goes into the quick section of the dance, and this is the last step. And the children have performed the point behind heels toe step. This dance is special because it finishes with an assemble change leap at the end. I hope you've really enjoyed what you've seen today. This is just a taster of what I teach down at Inspire, and I really hope I've encouraged your children or grandchildren or people that you may know to come and take part. As I can't stress enough, Highland dancing is for all levels, all abilities, and for all age groups. And you can get in touch below at the website at Inspire or by the telephone number. And my name is Yvonne. Thank you very much.
So probably the most iconic Highland Games event that sort of springs to mind for most people would be the caber. The caber is an accuracy event rather than a distance event. As with a lot of things Highland Games, there can be some local variation. There is no standard weight or length of caber, but generally speaking you can be anything between 17 to, I believe the world record's 24 feet. For a caber, and the weight is less important than the overall density and length of the caber. A longer caber is arguably harder to turn than a shorter, heavier caber. What we're looking at is the thrower will present themselves to the thin end of the caber, and a judge or the previous competitor will assist them with it, as you can see here, picking up the heavy end and walking in towards the competitor who's about to throw. Once the throwing competitor's confirmed that they have control of the caber, the other person then steps away and you are entirely on your own to do as you see fit with the caber. The technique would be, once you're confident you have the balance, it's a clasping of the fingers around the caber, and as you can see here, the caber's got 3 points of contact really. It's on the ground, it's in the hands, and it's on the shoulder. As you work your way down towards the bottom of the caber, what we're looking to be doing is get down to the sort of tapered end here, squeezing it between the hands, squeezing it in between the heels of the hands, pressing it in towards the shoulder, and you're almost looking for a sort of wee pop up. Obviously, if the caber's leaning too far back, we're going to lose control of it when it comes up. And if the caber's leaning too far forward, or if it's too straight, as soon as we make that pop, it's going to be wanting to get away from us. So we need to make sure we're getting that balance of feeling enough weight on the shoulder and having enough control in the hands. Once we've squeezed it in between the hands, a little pop up, get your hands underneath it and stand up with it. So we're looking to support the caber. Again, sometimes it's personal preference, but it's roundabouts at the belly area you're looking to carry. The caber too low, you don't really have enough bounce to sort of pull it, and if it's too high, you're going to sort of lose control of it. Now you've got to think, if we're talking sort of 17 to 20 foot for a caber, you're carrying it here, you've only got that amount under control. The rest of the cabers are way up in space. So that's why the concept of the longer caber actually being more complicated, because there's a lot more wood up there. So to get this end over end, what we're doing is we're looking to run forward, get a little bit of momentum into the heavy end of the caber that's up in air, and the quicker that's moving, the easier it will be to turn the caber. So again, I said it's not a distance event most of the time. It's an accuracy event. So if you imagine we are, if you had an eagle eye view, the thrower would be running onto a clock face. So again, imagine the clock face. We've run in, we're at 6 o'clock, boom, we've hit the caber. The heavy end should hit the middle of the clock face where the hands come, and if we've got enough momentum, we would be looking for it to go end over end, and you're wanting the narrow end that was in your hands to be hitting 12 o'clock. So that's the general idea. However, cabers are designed, the purpose of the competition is that the cabers should only be able to be tossed, as the throwers referred to, by the top 2 or 3 athletes on the field. It's not much of a spectacle if everybody can rock along and do it. So how else the caber is marked? So it's marked on accuracy, so obviously the straighter it is. So from the point where you are running, throwing, you stand still, and you are then marked on how straight the caber is. Again, worked off a clock face, and the score works on minutes. So either 12 o'clock's a perfect 12, that would be your sort of perfect throw, and then you're worked on minutes, either minutes to or minutes past 12, depending on how far it's gone over. Not everybody's going to get that, of course, so we have side judges who are also looking at, once the caber is tossed and the heavy end hits the ground, they are marking the angle of the caber. Once the heavy end hits the ground, how high up does the light end go before it turns over? And either it turns over and you get marked on time, or it doesn't quite turn over and you get marked on the distance of this angle here. Because again, as I said, it's only really the sort of top 2 or 3 that should be able to toss the heavier of the cabers. I hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. It's given you a wee insight into the background and history of the games and what to expect when we see you in person on Games Day. For more information on the next date of the Perth Highland Games, check out the website here. I hope to see you there.